My mother pretended to have Alzheimer's so she could live with me. Later, I found out she was secretly recording audio to try and get custody of my son. After my dad passed away, she started calling more often, her voice trembling, sometimes confused, sometimes rambling about things that didn't make sense. She'd forget what day it was, repeat the same story twice in 5 minutes, misplace things. I lived in Lyon, hours away from her flat in Marseilles, so I couldn't see for myself what was really going on. One afternoon, she called me sobbing, said she'd left the oven on all night and woke up to smoke in the kitchen, that she was scared of hurting herself, scared of becoming one of those people. I remember her saying that. One of those people. I cried after we hung up. And a week later, I moved her in with me. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. I'm an only child. My father, Pierre, had died just a year before, and I guess I thought, if I didn't step up, who would? My wife Clara wasn't thrilled, but she agreed. She said we'd manage. Our son Luca was 5, full of questions and energy, and our lives were already chaotic. Still, we tried to make space for her, both in the house and in our routines. The first few weeks were hard. She was forgetful, yes, but also needy. She'd wander into our room late at night, asking if we'd heard the voices too. Once I found her in the garden at 3 a.m., barefoot, looking up at the sky like she was waiting for something. Clara begged me to consider getting help, professional help, but I refused. She was my mother. Then, things started to shift. She stopped having bad days. Her confusion faded. She started dressing better, putting on makeup again, organizing drawers that weren't hers. I caught her giving Luca strange looks sometimes, like she was observing him, not watching him. She started asking odd questions. What does Luca call me when I'm not around? Does he ever talk about his other grandmother? I brushed it off. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe she was trying to find her place in our family. Maybe she was lonely. But then, one evening while she was out at the market, Clara called me into our bedroom. She looked pale. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, Clara said. It's recording. What do you mean? She's recording everything, every room, every conversation. I didn't believe her until she showed me. A dozen audio files, all labeled by date and time. One was from the previous night. Clara and I talking about Luca's school, complaining about how tired we were, and me jokingly saying, sometimes I wish we could send him to boarding school just for a week. It was out of context, but in the wrong hands it would sound horrible. There were weeks of recordings. Conversations with Luca, arguments between me and Clara, private phone calls. She even had one of Luca crying during a tantrum. We didn't confront her right away. We wanted to understand what she was doing. Clara started digging, and what she found made me physically sick. My mother had contacted a solicitor in Marseilles. She was asking about grandparent custody rights in case she could prove we were unfit. She had a document claiming she was living with us because she was worried for Luca's well-being. She was building a case against her own son. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to forget things, replaying those shaky hands holding a mug, the tears she faked, the confusion. It was all a performance, every bit of it. Clara wanted to kick her out immediately, but I hesitated. I needed to know why. Why would my own mother try to take my son from me? Why lie about being sick, about losing her mind, just to get close to us? I kept thinking. There must be a reason, something I don't know. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. I said good morning, kissed her cheek, asked how she slept. She smiled and said she'd had a dream that Luca was singing in a choir. He's got such a sweet voice, she whispered. I watched her stir sugar into her tea with perfectly steady hands. That day, while she napped in the living room, Clara and I removed every recording device we could find. 2 in the bedrooms, 1 in the hallway, 1 tucked into a book spine in the office. Another one, hidden inside a teddy bear in Luca's room. She had bugged her own grandson's bedroom. I felt sick. We saved everything, every file, every device, and Clara started compiling a record of our own. Dates, times, behavior, screenshots. If she was building a case, so were we. But the real breaking point came 3 days later, when Clara caught her trying to talk to Luca in private. He was in the garden playing with his trucks, and she sat beside him and said, "Do you ever feel scared when Mummy and Daddy fight? You can tell me. I won't be mad." Luca didn't understand the question. He just laughed and said something about dragons. But Clara saw red. She stormed outside, grabbed Luca's hand and said, "Don't you ever speak to him like that again?" My mother just stared at her with that same calm expression. Not surprised, Not scared, just patient. That night, we confronted her. I sat her down at the dining table and laid the devices in front of her. She looked at them in silence. No shock, no denial. You lied to me, I said. You pretended to have Alzheimer's. You moved in under false pretenses. You've been recording us. Why? She didn't answer at first. Then she said something I'll never forget. Because I know what you did when you were younger. My mouth went dry. I tried to protect you then, she continued. And now I'm protecting Luca. What are you talking about? She leaned forward. You think I forgot, but I remember everything. You used to have those outbursts. You broke your cousin's nose when you were 15. You punched a wall so hard at 17 I had to take you to hospital. You think that just goes away? That was 20 years ago, I shouted. I've never laid a hand on Luca, never. She looked unmoved. I can't take that risk. That's when I realized. This wasn't about Alzheimer's. It wasn't about Luca. It wasn't even about safety. It was about control. She needed to feel powerful again. And she was using Luca as a weapon. Clara had heard enough. She stood up and said, You have 1 hour to pack. My mother looked at me, cold, empty. You'll regret this. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. My vision blurred with rage. An hour later, she was gone. But I had no idea that the worst part was still coming. The silence after she left was deafening. Clara tried to act normal, but I could feel her tension in the way she moved, over-checking the locks, constantly glancing at Luca, making sure he was never out of her sight. I couldn't blame her. Even though the house was quiet again, it didn't feel safe. I kept wondering if she had already sent those recordings to someone, if she had a backup stored somewhere, if she was still watching us from a distance. That paranoia ate at me. I started triple-checking every room, looking for more devices. I even took apart light switches, inspected under the furniture, scanned the backyard. But the real blow came 2 weeks later. We received a letter. Official. Stamped. My mother had filed a complaint with the Protection de l'Enfance, the French Child Welfare Service. She claimed emotional neglect, psychological harm, and an unsafe home environment. She described Clara as aggressive, controlling, me as unstable, with a history of violent outbursts. She said she was forced to leave the residence after raising concerns about Luca's safety. And then, in the final paragraph, she requested temporary custody of Luca while an investigation was conducted. I read it twice, then again. My fingers went numb. She had actually done it. She was trying to take my son away through the courts. Clara didn't cry. Not at first. She just stood there, holding the letter like it was on fire. Then she calmly said, She's going to destroy us. I called our lawyer the same day. We gave him everything. Audio files, hidden devices, screenshots of messages she'd sent me in the weeks before moving in, where she clearly manipulated me into inviting her. He said the evidence was strong, but the process wouldn't be easy. The Child Protection Services would have to conduct interviews, both with us and with Luca's teachers. There might be home visits, psychological assessments. Worst of all, they'd take her complaint seriously, no matter how insane it sounded, because she had posed as a concerned family member with proof. And even though I knew we had the truth on our side, a part of me couldn't shake the fear. All it takes is one mistake, one bad day, one wrong word, one social worker who doesn't like the way Clara raises her voice, or the fact that I once punched a wall in my teens, one poorly interpreted audio clip taken out of context. That fear settled in my chest like concrete. Clara and I started walking on eggshells. We stopped arguing, even about small things. We smiled through gritted teeth when Luca was around. We felt like we were being watched constantly, even if she was gone. I kept waiting for her next move. It came in the form of a visit from a social worker named Marianne. She was polite, professional, asked if she could look around, asked about Luca's schedule, our routines, his sleep, his diet. She spoke to him gently, asked if he liked living here, how he felt around Mummy and Daddy. Luca, being 5, gave wildly unhelpful answers like, I like spaghetti, and sometimes I cry when it's bedtime. I couldn't tell if that was good or bad. After she left, I sat on the stairs and felt something I hadn't in years, helplessness. I had done everything right. I had provided for my family. I had been patient, compassionate. I had taken in a mother who lied to my face for months, and now I was the one under investigation? Clara sat beside me. She didn't say anything, just leaned her head against my shoulder. I didn't tell her what was going through my mind, because the truth was, part of me still wanted to know what exactly my mother had planned. what she really wanted, and whether this was revenge or something darker. The social worker's visit rattled me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the questions or the way she scanned every corner of our home like she was expecting to find chains in the basement. It was the idea that somehow my mother had planted doubt, and that was enough. I kept replaying everything in my head, every word my mother had said, every time she'd looked at Luca like he was hers, every calculated moment she'd acted confused just to get sympathy. It all made sense now, but it also made me wonder, had this been her plan all along? From the first phone call, or had something snapped later? 3 days after the visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of instinct. Hello? There was silence. Then a voice I knew too well. You know, this could have been easier if you'd just admitted the truth. I didn't respond. She continued, You're unstable and Clara's cold. That boy needs love. He needs me. I hung up. I don't know why I didn't scream at her or curse or threaten her. Maybe I was afraid that even raising my voice could somehow be used against me. Everything felt like a trap now. Like every word, every breath, had weight. Clara saw it all over my face. She called you? I nodded. She's never going to stop, is she? She whispered. And I realized then, we weren't just defending ourselves from a false accusation. We were in the middle of a war with someone who truly believed she was right. My mother wasn't just trying to hurt us. She thought she was saving Luca. That's when I started digging into her past. I contacted an old neighbor of hers from Marseilles, Madame Lavigne. She'd known my parents for over 30 years. When I asked if my mother had shown signs of memory loss before, she hesitated. She told us she was moving because the flat brought back bad memories of Pierre. She never said anything about Alzheimer's. That struck me. Because when she called me crying that night about the oven, she specifically said she was afraid she was losing her mind. So why lie to them? I pushed further. Madame Lavigne eventually confessed something else. Apparently, just a few weeks before moving in with us, my mother had been involved in a heated altercation with another neighbor, someone who accused her of spying on them, said she'd been taking notes on their children, even photographing them from her window. The police had been called. No charges were filed, but the story had circulated quietly through the building. Most people assumed she was just lonely or strange, but I knew better now. She wasn't just trying to take Luca. She'd been looking for a child to claim. It had always been about control, about rewriting herself into someone else's story, someone who mattered more, someone who was needed. She had lost my father. She had no friends. She had no purpose, so she created one. And she chose my family to fill that hole. When I told Clara, she just sat there in silence for a long time. Then she asked, what if she tries to take him, like physically? The question chilled me. I hadn't even considered it until that moment, but it wasn't a stretch. The woman who had lied about a disease, planted recorders, manipulated legal systems, and stalked other people's children, of course she was capable of it. That night I changed every lock, installed a security system, alerted Luca's school, gave them a photo of my mother and warned them not to let her near the gates. But even with all that, I didn't feel safe, because now it wasn't just about custody, it was about obsession. And obsession never ends cleanly. I stopped sleeping properly. Every creak in the floorboards felt like footsteps. Every car that slowed down in front of our house made my chest tighten. I'd find myself staring out the window at 2 a.m., expecting to see her silhouette on the sidewalk, just watching. Clara noticed. She started leaving little notes for me. He's safe. We're okay. But I could see the fear in her too. She'd jump when the doorbell rang. She flinched every time the phone vibrated. Luca, thankfully, didn't understand any of it. We kept the facade going for him. School, bedtime stories, weekend pancakes. But behind the closed doors of our bedroom, we lived in quiet panic. A week after I changed the locks, my mother left a voicemail. I'll give you until the end of the month to reconsider. After that, I'll do what I have to do. No anger, no yelling. Just calm. Calculated. That scared me more than anything else. We gave the message to our lawyer. He agreed it sounded like a threat, but not a direct one, not enough to act on. Everything she did was subtle, just below the surface. Just enough to suggest something without saying it outright. She was good at this. Too good. Then something happened that cracked everything open. Luca had been playing with Clara's phone, taking selfies, recording silly videos. That night, as we were clearing out the photo gallery, we found a 12-second clip we hadn't noticed before. It showed Luca playing on the floor, building a tower out of blocks. In the background, through the half-open window, A figure passed behind the fence. A woman. Wearing my mother's coat. Clara froze, rewound the clip, played it again. The image was blurry, but unmistakable. Same walk, same posture, same gray wool coat she used to wear when she lived with us. She had been near our home, again. We called the police. They took the report, but as expected, they couldn't do much. She hadn't entered the property. She hadn't made contact. Legally, she hadn't broken any laws, but we knew. We knew she was watching. That night, Clara locked herself in the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. When she came out, she said, "I can't live like this. I can't raise our son in a war zone." And I knew exactly what she meant. We were fighting a ghost, a shadow that slipped through the cracks of the law, a woman who wore a mask of grief and concern so convincingly that the world believed her. But beneath it all, she was just hollow and dangerous. I started researching relocation. We couldn't leave France entirely, not while the custody case was still technically open, but we could move within the country. Somewhere quieter, somewhere she wouldn't expect. But 2 days before we planned to sign the rental for a new flat in Montpellier, we received another letter. This time, it wasn't from a court. It was from a woman named Émilie Rousseau, a stranger. She introduced herself as a former friend of my mother, and her message sent chills down my spine. "I know what she's done. I know what she's capable of. You're not the first." I read the letter 3 times before I showed it to Clara. It was handwritten, elegant, cursive, no return address. The kind of letter that feels almost too deliberate, like the person writing it wanted you to know they had nothing left to lose. Clara's hands trembled as she read. Émilie Rousseau claimed she had once been close to my mother years ago, when they both volunteered at a church community group in Marseilles. She said they weren't exactly friends, but that she had seen enough of my mother to know what she really was. Then came the line that hit me hardest. "Your mother becomes obsessed with families, always ones with young children. She inserts herself slowly, pretends to help, makes herself indispensable, and then she poisons everything." The letter described another family, Laurent and Beatrice, with a daughter named Adele. Émilie said she watched the same pattern play out, my mother growing concerned for the child's well-being, making accusations, quietly suggesting the parents were unfit. Eventually, Adele was removed temporarily from the home after a misunderstood report filed by my mother. The girl was returned months later, but by then, the marriage had collapsed. Beatrice had left the city. Laurent became reclusive. The damage was done. My mother moved on to the next family, and no one ever connected the dots. Reading those words felt like a weight pressing on my chest, because suddenly, all the little things made sense. The way she always talked about the innocence of children, her obsession with being needed, the manipulative kindness, the gaslighting. She wasn't just trying to help Luca, she was trying to replace us, to become the mother, the protector, the victim, and the hero of the story, all at once. Émilie ended the letter with a warning. "She'll escalate if she feels she's losing. She always does." I didn't know whether to feel terrified or validated. Clara, for the first time, looked genuinely shaken, not angry, not just exhausted, scared. She said, "Do you think she's done this more than twice?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to. But inside, I knew. If someone like Émilie had taken the time to find us, to write this letter, then there were probably others. Families who hadn't spoken up, people who still didn't realize they'd been manipulated, parents too ashamed to admit they'd been outsmarted by someone who pretended to love them. We gave the letter to our lawyer. He said it could help discredit her, especially if we could track down this other family and get a statement, but it wouldn't stop her. He said something that chilled me to the bone. She doesn't need to win custody. She just needs to keep you fighting. That's how she wins. Because fighting meant court dates, home inspections, psychological evaluations, sleepless nights, marital strain, fear. And if she couldn't take Luca physically, she'd shatter the home he lived in until there was nothing left. She wanted to break us. That night, I called every number I could find for Laurent and Beatrice. Most were disconnected, but I left messages, emails, anything. I had to know the full story. Meanwhile, Clara and I packed boxes in silence. We didn't speak much that week. There was nothing left to say, except this. She was going to come back. I could feel it. The move to Montpellier happened faster than we'd planned. No goodbyes, no announcements, just boxes in the back of a rented van and Luca asleep in his car seat. unaware that we were once again running. I hated how that felt, like we were fleeing from a ghost. But what else could we do? I didn't tell my mother. Not a word. No message. No change of address notice. Nothing. But I knew she'd find out eventually. She always found a way. The new flat was smaller, quieter, tucked at the edge of a residential neighborhood filled with retirees and young couples who didn't ask questions. It should have felt like a fresh start. Instead, it felt like exile. Clara unpacked obsessively. She spent hours rearranging furniture, scrubbing spotless counters, folding Luca's clothes in perfect stacks. She said it helped her think. But I knew what it really was: control. She needed to feel like she had some. Meanwhile, I threw myself into research. I kept waiting for a reply from the other family Emily had mentioned. I checked my inbox every hour, refreshed the voicemail, scanned the news for anything with my mother's name, but there was nothing. And in the silence, something else started creeping in: distance. Clara and I barely touched. We didn't fight, not exactly, but we spoke only when necessary. Luca was the center of every sentence. Everything outside of him was quiet, cold, and strangely polite, like we were strangers staying in the same hotel room. One night, after putting Luca to bed, I found Clara staring out the kitchen window. She had that look again. Lost. Haunted. "She stole something from us," she said softly. I thought she meant the house. Our peace. But then she turned to me and said, "I don't know if I love you the same way anymore." It was like being punched in the stomach, but quietly, slowly, like drowning. "I don't mean I want to leave," she added quickly. "It's just, I feel like everything between us is poison now, like we've spent so long surviving. I forgot what it felt like to just be your wife." I didn't know what to say, because she was right. Our relationship had become a fortress, not a home, a defense mechanism. And it was starting to collapse under the weight of everything we were holding back. Still, I didn't let it show. I told her I understood, that we'd find our way back, that all of this was temporary. But part of me didn't believe it. And then, just as the silence between us started to feel permanent, I got a voicemail. A man's voice, rough, hesitant. Hello, my name is Laurent. My ex-wife Beatrice got your message. We'd rather not talk about the past, but if your mother is still doing this to people, maybe it's time we said something." I froze. I called him back that night. What he told me changed everything. Laurent's voice over the phone was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes from someone who's already lived through the worst and survived, but never fully recovered. He didn't speak like a victim. He spoke like someone describing a storm that had passed through his life and taken everything. "She doesn't just manipulate," he said. "She infects." He told me about his daughter, Adele, how she'd been a quiet, sensitive girl who adored her parents, how my mother, posing as a kind neighbor, started showing up with small gifts, toys, baked goods, offers to babysit just for an hour or two. "At first we were grateful," he said. "She seemed harmless, lonely. We felt sorry for her." Then came the subtle warnings, my mother claiming she'd seen Adele with bruises, that the girl flinched when her father raised his voice, that Beatrice seemed too tired to be attentive. "She made herself the savior," Laurent told me. "And when we stopped letting her in, she made herself the witness." She filed a complaint anonymously. But everyone knew it was her. It led to an investigation. Adele was temporarily placed with an aunt during the process. Even after she was returned, the damage was done. Beatrice sank into depression. Laurent started drinking. They divorced within a year. "She never wanted custody," Laurent said. "She just wanted to be right. To be the one who saw what no one else did. And she'll burn your house down just to prove the fire was real." By the end of the call, I couldn't breathe. He told me he'd be willing to submit a written statement, said Beatrice might too. But he warned me not to expect closure. "She doesn't stop. She waits." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for over an hour. The walls around me suddenly felt thin. The new flat, the locked doors, the security system, it all felt useless against someone like her. Someone who didn't need to break in to destroy you. She just needed to be believed a little more than you. When I finally told Clara about the call, she didn't react the way I expected. She didn't cry or rage. She just nodded, very slowly, and said, "So, we're not crazy." But the relief didn't last. Because the next morning, Luca came running into our room holding a small envelope. "There was a letter in the mailbox," he said cheerfully. "It has my name on it." Clara and I looked at each other. My heart dropped. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my mother's. We opened it in silence. Inside was a card. No threats, no accusations. Just a drawing of a grandmother holding hands with a little boy under a tree, and one sentence. I miss you every day, Luca. I hope you're still safe. There was no return address, no signature, but the message was clear. She had found us. I stared at the card for a long time, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. She had our address. Again, no one else knew where we'd gone. No friends, no extended family. Clara's parents didn't even have the exact location. We had done everything to vanish quietly, and still, she found us. Clara took the card and locked it in a drawer like it was radioactive. We're not telling Luca, she said firmly. He doesn't need more ghosts, I agreed. But something inside me shifted that day. The line had been crossed. This wasn't about family anymore. It wasn't about concern or legal manipulation. This was stalking. This was harassment. This was dangerous. We went straight to the police. They took the report, but again, no direct threat, no trespassing, no name on the envelope. They advised us to stay vigilant and gave us a contact at the local precinct. That was it. Clara was livid. So she can send letters to a 5-year-old and there's nothing we can do? I didn't have an answer. I felt helpless all over again. That night, Luca asked if his grandmother would ever visit. I froze. Why? I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. I just thought maybe she could come to my school show next week. Clara turned her face away. I saw her blink hard, swallowing tears. We had never told him what really happened. Just that Grandma had gone back to her city and wouldn't be visiting anymore. We thought we were protecting him, but she had reached him anyway. Somehow she was still inside our lives, even when she wasn't in our lives. That week, Clara stopped sleeping. She kept the lights on in every room at night. She started checking Luca's window twice before bed. At one point, she said, "What if she's already in the building? What if she rented the flat across the street?" And as paranoid as it sounded, I had wondered the same. I began checking the cars parked outside, noting license plates, watching faces in the crowd when I walked Luca to school. I even caught myself looking over my shoulder while buying groceries. This wasn't parenting anymore. It was survival. Then, 3 days later, it escalated. Clara went to pick Luca up from school. The teacher met her at the gate looking confused. She asked, "Did you change pickup plans?" Clara's heart stopped. "No, why?" "Because your mother-in-law was here earlier, said she was taking Luca to the dentist. She had his name, his birthday. She knew your address in Lyon." Clara nearly collapsed. Thankfully, the teacher didn't release him. She said the school had a strict ID policy, but the fact that my mother had tried, in broad daylight at a school surrounded by staff, was terrifying. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was escalating. We contacted the police again. This time, they took it seriously. The attempt to remove Luca from school without permission was reported officially. A restraining order was filed. Surveillance around the school increased, but it didn't make us feel safe, because I knew how she operated. She didn't need to win in court. She just needed to break us enough that we gave up on each other. And slowly, without even realizing it, that's exactly what was starting to happen. After the incident at the school, everything changed. Not just the routines or the locks or the police reports, but something in Clara. Something fundamental. She became quieter. Not angry, not dramatic, just gone. Like a light had switched off inside her. She still played with Luca, still smiled for him, still packed his lunch and braided his hair with perfect care. But the moment he was out of the room, she'd retreat, into herself, into silence. I tried to bring her back. I cooked her favorite meals. I suggested short weekend trips. I even joked badly about how one day we'd write a book about all of this. She just looked at me and said, "I'm not going to survive this, Theo. Not like this." I knew what she meant. This wasn't just trauma anymore. It was corrosion. It was eating us alive from the inside out. 3 days later, I came home from picking up groceries to find Clara sitting on the edge of our bed, suitcase beside her, Luca's backpack already packed. I froze. "Where are you going?" I asked. She didn't look up. "To my sister's, in Vienna." "What?" "I need time, Theo. Time to think. Time to breathe without flinching every time the phone rings." I felt my chest cave in. "You're taking Luca?" She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't anger. It wasn't even pain. It was exhaustion. "I'm not running away with him," she said. "I just need to protect him. And I don't know how to do that here, with you. That last part broke me. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I saw in her face that nothing I said would matter anymore. This wasn't a punishment. It was survival. She kissed my cheek. You're a good man, but she's poisoned you too, and I don't know where you end and she begins anymore. Then she left. Just like that, the apartment was still. Too still. I walked around like a ghost, picking up toys Luca had left behind. A sock, a drawing, his toothbrush, and in that silence it hit me. My mother had done it. She hadn't needed to take Luca through the courts. She hadn't needed to win anything. She just needed to push hard enough. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the floor of Luca's empty room, staring at the walls, and whispered to no one in particular, "You won't win. You don't get to win." But deep down, I knew she already had. The silence in the apartment felt unnatural. It wasn't just loneliness. It was defeat. For days, I drifted through the empty flat like I didn't belong in it anymore. Every object reminded me of what I'd lost. Clara's perfume still lingered in the hallway. Luca's favorite blanket was folded neatly on the couch. Their absence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I should have broken down. But I didn't. Something else took over. Not grief, not despair, rage. Pure, focused rage. She had taken my home, my family. She had infected every corner of my life, and I had let her. I'd played by her rules, stayed calm, followed the law, waited for the system to protect me, and all it got me was a broken marriage and a son who now lived in another country. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went back to Marseilles. I didn't tell Clara, didn't tell the lawyer. I just packed a bag, got in the car, and drove. 5 hours of winding highways and noise in my head I couldn't shut off. I went to her building first, just to see. It looked exactly the same. Cold stone facade, iron balconies. The street was quiet, but her name was no longer on the mailboxes. She had moved. Of course she had. I started asking around. Old neighbors. A few recognized me, most didn't. Madame Levine remembered. She looked at me with pity and fear and said, "She left suddenly, after the last family filed a complaint. The one with the twins. The twins. I didn't even know about them. She lived upstairs from them," Madame Levine continued. "Said the parents were abusive, that she could hear the crying through the walls. I asked what happened to that family. They left," she said. "Moved to Nice, I think. They were terrified of her." That was the third family. Not just me. Not just Laurent and Beatrice, but another. And who knows how many more. She wasn't just a manipulator. She was a predator. And the world had let her do this, over and over again, because she wore grief like a mask and whispered just enough truth to be taken seriously. So I made a decision. I drove to the courthouse. I filed a formal statement, not just as a defendant in a custody case, but as a victim. I provided the audio recordings, the devices, Emily Rousseau's letter, Laurent's voicemail, the school incident, the card addressed to Luca, and then I said something I never thought I'd say out loud. I believe my mother is a danger to children, and I believe she needs to be investigated. The woman behind the desk didn't flinch. She simply said, "You're not the first to say that." That stopped me cold. Not the first? How many complaints has she had? The woman hesitated, then leaned in and said, "At least 3 families that we know of. One of them fled the country." That was when it clicked. My mother didn't want to raise Luca. She wanted to own him, to recreate some perfect fantasy where she was the protector, the savior, the one who mattered. And when that fantasy cracked, even slightly, she'd rather destroy the family than admit she was wrong. She wasn't just broken. She was dangerous, and I wasn't going to let her do this to anyone ever again. When I left the courthouse that day, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt watched. Paranoia had become second nature by then, but this was different. Sharper, like something was already unraveling, and I was just seconds behind it. I returned to Lyon late that night. The flat was still, hollow, but now, there was a purpose humming underneath the silence. I had taken the first real step against her, not just defending myself, but accusing her, exposing her. Clara didn't answer when I called. I left her a message, trying to explain what I'd done, what I'd learned. I told her about the twins, about the woman at the courthouse, about how I finally understood what my mother really was. I begged her to call me back. She didn't. Instead, the next morning, I woke up to a knock at my door. 2 officers. Not local police, judicial police from Marseilles. I knew instantly. She filed a counter-complaint, the taller one said, barely meeting my eyes. Accusing you of harassment, intimidation, and mental cruelty, she's requesting a protective order. My mouth went dry. She said you showed up at her old address, that you frightened her neighbors, that you're trying to ruin her life out of revenge. It was surreal. She was turning the truth upside down in real time, again. She also submitted a claim that you're attempting to manipulate the court system by enlisting false witnesses, the officer added. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it had become. She's doing exactly what she accuses everyone else of, I muttered. We've seen that before. The officer replied quietly, almost to himself. They didn't arrest me, but they took my statement. They warned me to avoid all contact. The protective order was temporary, pending a hearing, and just like that, she'd flipped the board again. Later that day, I received an email from Laurent. He had spoken to Beatrice. She agreed to submit a written statement. She was hesitant at first, Laurent wrote. But when she heard about your son, she said, "If I stay quiet, I'm letting it happen again." Attached was her letter. It was brutal, honest, unapologetic. She detailed everything. The slow invasion, the subtle manipulation, the breakdown of her marriage, the fear, the isolation. She even mentioned therapy, how it had taken her years to realize none of it was her fault. I read it 3 times. And then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I cried. Not just from relief, but from rage, from grief. From the overwhelming awareness that this had been going on for years and no one had stopped her, until now. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. A blurry shot of Clara and Luca at a park in Vienna. My heart stopped. She had found them, and now I wasn't the only one in danger. The moment I saw the photo, something inside me snapped. Not panic, not fear, resolve. This had gone far enough. I stared at the image, Clara sitting on a park bench, Luca feeding ducks beside her, and I could tell it had been taken from a distance. She hadn't noticed. Neither had he, but I recognized the angle, the blurred railing in the foreground, the shape of the trees behind them. This wasn't just a photo. It was a message. I can find them. I still control this. I immediately called Clara. No answer. I tried again. Again. Nothing. I didn't even leave a voicemail. I just booked the next train to Vienna and packed my bag in silence. The entire trip, I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd convince her to believe me, really believe me, that this wasn't about paranoia anymore, that my mother was escalating, that no one was safe. But when I arrived in Vienna, Clara wasn't angry. She was terrified. She opened the door with swollen eyes and hugged me like I was her only lifeline. She followed us here, she whispered. I nodded. She left a note in Luca's backpack. I found it yesterday. He didn't even notice. What did it say? Clara led me into the kitchen and handed me a folded piece of lined paper. It was in the same handwriting, the same unsettling calm. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but one day you'll thank me. He'll be safer with me than with either of you. That was it. No signature, no address, just certainty. I looked at Clara. She looked back at me, and in that moment, we knew. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't legal drama or psychological warfare. This was abduction waiting to happen. We went straight to the Austrian authorities, filed the report, showed them everything. The past police reports, the court filings, the restraining order, even the testimonies from Beatrice and Laurent. They took it seriously. But laws have borders, and my mother? She didn't care about borders. She didn't need to take Luca with force. She just needed the right moment. A school pickup, a distracted second, a brief walk to the bakery. She only needed one opening. So we made a choice. We contacted a private security consultant, someone Clara's sister recommended. He specialized in family protection and relocation support. He read our file and said just 4 words, "You need to disappear." I didn't argue. Within a week, everything changed. We secured new identities, at least administratively, changed names at school, opened accounts under middle names, moved again, not across the country, across the continent. Luca was told it was a special family adventure, that sometimes families need to start over in quiet places. He accepted it with the innocence of someone who still trusted the world. Clara and I, We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. She was still unsure, still distant, but she didn't stop me. Didn't push me away. We were bound now by something deeper than love. We were bound by survival. One night, weeks later, I received an email from a burner account. No photo, no threat, just one sentence. Wherever you go, I will still be his blood. She had lost, but she wanted to remind me of what she still believed she had, and maybe she was right. But blood doesn't make you family, not anymore. We stayed hidden. New names, new address, new lives stitched together with the thread of fear and necessity. In a remote town near the Slovenian border, we lived like witnesses under protection, always glancing over our shoulders, always pretending this was normal. Luca adapted quickly. Children do. He made new friends, learned a few words in the local dialect, and never questioned why we didn't talk to our neighbors or why Mummy and Daddy always checked the doors twice. But Clara was fading, not visibly. She smiled. She laughed, but something in her eyes never came back. Something warm. Something that used to belong to us. Some nights I'd find her sitting in Luca's room after he'd fallen asleep, just watching him, like she was waiting for someone to try and take him again. And me? I was consumed by one question. What if she never stops? Because that email, that final message, wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that no matter how far we ran, she'd always believe he was hers. She didn't need to take him to feel entitled to him. She didn't need a court to feel righteous. She just needed time. And she had plenty. I couldn't live like that. Not forever. So I made a decision. I flew back to France alone, without telling Clara. I needed answers. Closure. Finality. I didn't go to the police. I went to a psychiatric hospital in Marseilles. I had found out through a friend, someone who still worked in legal circles, that my mother had recently been admitted under an emergency order. The official note cited persistent delusional disorder and escalating fixation on non-biological parental claims. She had tried to report another family, a fourth, but this time they pushed back harder, and the judge, having seen our case, finally connected the dots. She wasn't just unstable, she was sick, and for the first time in her life, someone had said it out loud. They allowed me a supervised visit. She didn't recognize me at first, or maybe she pretended not to. She just smiled and said, "You look tired. Parenthood will do that to you." I sat down, looked her in the eyes, and asked her the one question that haunted me the most. Why Luca? Her smile didn't fade. Because he deserved better, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because you were never meant to be a father. My hands clenched. I felt my nails bite into my palm. You're wrong, I said. I am a father, and I protected him. From you. Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, something flickered behind them. A hint of the woman who raised me, the mother who used to tuck me in at night, the ghost of who she used to be. But then it was gone. She looked past me and said, "You'll see. He'll come back to me one day. They always do." I stood. That was the last time I saw her. She remained under psychiatric evaluation indefinitely. No court, no verdict. Just a quiet end to a storm that had uprooted our lives. When I returned to Slovenia, Clara was furious at first. Then I told her everything. And for the first time in months, she hugged me, not out of fear, not out of necessity, but because she chose to. And when Luca ran to me the next morning yelling, "Papa!" at the top of his lungs, I realized something simple, something powerful. She hadn't won. Not really. She had broken pieces of us, yes. Damaged memories we'd never get back. But the core, the family. We were still standing. It's been 8 months since I last saw her. 8 months since that cold hospital room. Since her eyes passed right through me like I was a mistake she'd already erased from memory. She remains institutionalized, legally unfit, psychologically unstable, no longer a threat, at least on paper. But the truth is, she'll always live in the shadow of our story, in the way Clara double-checks Luca's school gate before leaving, in how I instinctively flinch when I hear footsteps behind me, in the quiet moments when everything feels too calm, and I wonder if peace is real or just the calm before another storm. But something has changed. We're not just surviving anymore, we're living again. Luca started painting. His drawings used to be vague and frantic, full of color without shape. Now, they're people. Scenes. He draws 3 figures almost every time. A man, a woman, and a small boy in the middle. He says it's us. Clara and I still have work to do. We're rebuilding trust. Not because of betrayal, but because trauma rewires the way people connect. But she smiles now. Not just for Luca, for me, for us. Some days, we sit in silence and it feels like healing. Other days, we argue over small things and it feels like progress. Because we're not tiptoeing anymore, we're standing. I keep all the letters, all the recordings, every file, every document. Not because I want to remember, but because forgetting is dangerous. Because what happened to us, to Laurent, to Beatrice, to the others, it wasn't just one woman's madness. It was a system that didn't listen until it was too late, and I want to be ready. Just in case it ever tries to repeat itself. But most of all, I keep them, because one day, Luca will ask. And when he does, I want to look him in the eyes and say, I protected you. I made mistakes. I was slow. I trusted the wrong person. But when it mattered most, I didn't run. I stood between you and the storm. Because in the end, being a parent isn't about being perfect, it's about being there, and she'll never understand that. But I do, and that's why I won.